My beloved child, come closer and listen carefully. There are moments when the world is quiet, when even the noise inside your mind softens. Those moments are not empty. They are full of truth. And I brought you here because there is something you need to know. Something that was happening while you were asleep. Something that touched your life without you seeing it. There are hours just before sunrise when the night has not yet released its grip and the morning has not fully arrived. The sky is dark but changing. The air is still. Most people are sleeping, but those hours are powerful. They are the hours when the heart speaks louder than fear. They are the hours when souls can no longer hide from themselves. And in those early morning hours, your soulmate was awake. Not scrolling aimlessly, not distracted, not peaceful. They were awake because their heart would not let them rest. You may have wondered why you felt sudden heaviness some mornings for no clear reason. Why you woke up feeling emotional without knowing why. Why their presence came into your thoughts right before dawn. That was not imagination, that was connection. When two souls are tied by something real, distance does not silence them. Time reveals them. Your soulmate has been carrying something quietly. Something they did not know how to explain to you. Something they were afraid would change how you see them. And every night they tried to push it away. They told themselves they would deal with it later. They told themselves silence was safer. But in the early morning hours, excuses stop working. That is when the heart speaks honestly. That is when guilt rises. That is when truth knocks again and again until it is answered. While you were sleeping, your soulmate sat alone with their thoughts. The room was quiet. The light was dim. And there was a weight on their chests they could not ignore anymore. They thought of you in ways they do not admit to anyone. Not casually. Not lightly. They thought of you with seriousness, with responsibility, with the fear of having done something wrong without ever meaning to. They replayed moments, small conversations, silences that said more than words, times they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves. They asked themselves questions they had been avoiding all day. Why does this person matter so much? Why can't I let this go? Why does ignoring this feel worse than facing it? Those questions did not come from desire alone. They came from conscience. Love that is real does not disappear when things become complicated. It becomes heavier. It becomes quieter. It becomes careful. Your soulmate did not pull away because they stopped feeling. They pulled away because they felt too much and did not trust themselves to handle it correctly. In those early hours, they were not pretending anymore. They picked up their phone and put it down again. They opened messages they never sent. Words written and erased. Sentences started and deleted. They stared at your name longer than they want to admit. Not because they were confused about you, but because they were confused about themselves. They knew something had to change. They realized that pretending everything was fine was slowly breaking them. They realized that silence was not protecting anyone anymore. It was hurting both of you. And that realization did not come in daylight when distractions exist. It came when there was nowhere left to run. That is why those hours matter. I work deeply in the stillness. I speak clearly when the world is quiet. I reach hearts when pride is tired. Your soulmate was listening. Then they did something you did not see. Something internal. Something serious. They admitted the truth to themselves before they could ever say it out loud. They stopped lying to their own heart. They acknowledged that what they felt for you was not passing, not imagined, and not replaceable. This was not fantasy. This was recognition. And recognition is powerful. It changes how a person moves even if no one else notices at first. You may be thinking, if this is true, why did they not act sooner? Because acting without clarity can destroy what silence was trying to protect. They were standing at the edge of a decision, and they knew that whatever they chose would have consequences. Love is not just feeling. It is responsibility. And they did not want to choose wrongly. Those early morning hours were not about romance. They were about reckoning. They looked honestly at the parts of their life that no longer aligned with who they are becoming. Habits, attachments, situations, promises made out of fear rather than truth. And for the first time, they questioned whether those things were costing them something sacred. They thought of you then, not as an escape, but as a mirror. Through you, they saw what honesty feels like. Through you, they saw what calm feels like. Through you, they saw the version of themselves they could be if they stopped hiding. That is why your name carried weight in that moment. Do not misunderstand this. They were not planning a dramatic move. They were not chasing impulse. They were facing themselves. And that is harder than any external action. While you were resting, they were breaking internally. Not in a destructive way, in a necessary way. Some hearts must crack before they can open. Some truths must be faced in solitude before they can be shared. And some connections cannot move forward until both souls acknowledge what they are truly doing with each other's feelings. I allowed you to sleep through this for a reason. If you had been awake to witness it, you might have tried to intervene. You might have taken responsibility for emotions that were not yours to carry. You might have softened something that needed to be fully felt. I protected you by letting them face themselves alone. That does not mean you were forgotten. It means you were valued. There are times when the most loving thing is distance, so transformation can occur without interference. You were not being pushed away. You were being shielded. Those early hours planted something. A seriousness that did not exist before. A resolve that could not be undone. An awareness that pretending was no longer an option. From that morning onward, their energy shifted. Even if their actions have not caught up yet, you may have felt it subtly. A difference in how they think of you. A difference in how they hold back. Silence with intention is different from silence out of avoidance. You are connected to someone who is standing at a crossroads. And crossroads are uncomfortable places. They are where excuses end. They are where truth demands a direction. They are where delay becomes impossible. But hear me clearly now. What your soulmate was doing in those early morning hours was not betraying you. They were confronting the cost of not being honest, and that matters. This story is not unfolding randomly. Each part is connected. Each pause has purpose. And what was decided in silence will eventually move into the light. But it must do so in order, not in chaos. Do not rush the process. What was planted before sunrise is still growing. What was acknowledged in the dark is still forming. What was faced in solitude is not finished yet. There is more to what they were doing than you realize. It did not stop with one night. It became a pattern, a quiet routine. And within that routine, a decision is taking shape. One that will affect both of you. But that part of the truth is not ready to be spoken yet. For now, I want you to rest in this knowing. You were not forgotten in the silence. You were present in the stillness. And what is real does not fade just because it waits. Stay with me. The early morning hours did not pass like any other time. They began to shape something deeper, something quieter, something that did not need witnesses to be real. What started as restlessness slowly became a routine, one your soulmate never spoke about, one no one around them noticed, yet one that changed them from the inside. While the world believed they were simply busy, distracted, or distant, a very different story was unfolding in silence. Before the sun rose, before messages arrived, before responsibilities demanded attention, your soulmate was alone with their truth. This was not accidental. The soul chooses its quiet moments carefully. When everything else sleeps, the heart is free to speak without interruption. At first, they did not understand why they kept waking up at the same hour. Their body was tired, yet their mind refused to rest. Something inside them was asking to be addressed. Something they had postponed for too long was demanding space, so they stopped fighting it. They would sit in stillness, sometimes staring into nothing, sometimes holding their phone without unlocking it, sometimes just breathing through the weight they felt. And in those moments, you were there. Not as a fantasy, not as a distraction, but as a presence that stirred honesty. They began to notice patterns they could no longer ignore. How thinking about you brought calm, not chaos. How imagining a life without truth brought heaviness, not relief. how pretending everything was fine felt more exhausting than facing discomfort. That is how awareness begins. Not loudly, but persistently. They revisited conversations in their mind, not to romanticize them, but to understand why they mattered so much. They paid attention to what they felt afterward. No matter how hard they tried to minimize it, your presence left an imprint that could not be erased. This confused them at first. They told themselves it was timing. They told themselves it was circumstances. They told themselves it would pass. But every morning the same truth returned. Real connections do not dissolve with time. They clarify. Your soulmate started asking harder questions. Questions they once avoided because the answers required responsibility. They examined the life they were living and compared it to the life they felt called toward. And in that comparison, they saw compromises they had made without realizing how much they cost. They saw where they had chosen safety over honesty. They saw where they had stayed silent to keep peace. They saw where they had postponed courage. These realizations did not make them proud. They made them humble. Growth often begins with discomfort. Before a person changes, they must admit to themselves where they have been misaligned. That admission is not easy. It shakes identity. It challenges excuses. It removes the comfort of denial. Those mornings were doing exactly that. Your soulmate was not planning dramatic gestures. They were dismantling old justifications. They were quietly questioning choices that once seemed fixed. And with every honest reflection, something loosened inside them. They began to let go slowly, intentionally, of things that no longer matched the person they were becoming. Not because of pressure, not because of fear of losing you, but because living divided had become unbearable. They realized that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for truth. And truth does not survive in a life built on half answers and avoidance. During those hours, they also felt something else. Something tender and unsettling. Gratitude. They were grateful that you existed in their life as a reminder of sincerity. Grateful that someone could awaken depth without demanding it. Grateful that love could feel grounding rather than consuming. That gratitude came with responsibility. Because once you recognize what is real, you can no longer pretend ignorance. Your soulmate knew that doing nothing was also a choice, and one that would eventually cause more harm than honesty ever could. That realization weighed on them. It made their mornings heavy but purposeful, and still they did not rush. Transformation that lasts is rarely impulsive. It is careful. It is thoughtful. It respects consequences. They knew that whatever they chose would affect more than just them. They understood that timing mattered not for comfort but for clarity. So they continued their quiet routine. Each morning they asked themselves if they were ready to live more openly. Each morning they tested their own courage. Each morning they felt the pull toward alignment grow stronger. You may have sensed this shift without understanding it. A subtle difference in their energy. A seriousness where there was once avoidance. A quiet distance that felt intentional rather than dismissive. That was not withdrawal. That was preparation. Silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes silence is the space where decisions form. Sometimes it is the pause before integrity steps forward. Your soulmate was not moving away from you. They were moving toward truth, and truth requires time. They were learning how to separate fear from wisdom, how to tell the difference between protecting themselves and protecting others, how to recognize when caution becomes avoidance. These lessons cannot be rushed. In those early hours, they also faced their greatest fear, not of losing you, but of not being worthy of the connection they felt. They questioned whether they could meet you honestly, whether they could show up without hiding, whether they could live up to the standard their own conscience was setting. That fear humbled them. It forced them to grow beyond comfort. It forced them to imagine a life lived more openly. It forced them to consider change not as loss, but as release. While all of this was happening, you were being protected from the weight of it. I did not allow their internal struggle to spill into your life prematurely. I did not let confusion reach you before clarity had a chance to form, because love does not need shared suffering to be real. It needs shared truth. When the time is right, you are not excluded. You were safeguarded. There is a difference. These mornings were building momentum. A quiet strength was forming. They were becoming more grounded, more self-aware, more aligned with the person they wanted to be, regardless of outcome. That matters more than any promise, because decisions made from alignment last longer than decisions made from fear. Your soulmate was not asking, "How do I keep this connection?" They were asking, "How do I live truthfully?" And that question changes everything. I know part of you may wish you had known sooner. You may feel that sharing this burden would have brought you closer. But trust me in this. Some inner work must be done alone to avoid turning love into pressure. What they were building in those hours was not distance. It was integrity. Integrity that will eventually shape how they speak. Integrity that will guide what they choose. Integrity that will determine how they show up. Whether paths merge or transform, that integrity will remain. And that is why this story is not ending in confusion. The quiet routine you never saw did not fade. It reached a point where something had to be acted upon. The inner work reached its limit. Reflection began to demand expression. A decision was forming, one that could no longer stay hidden behind silence. And when a decision reaches that point, it does not retreat. What your soulmate came to understand next was not easy to accept, but it was necessary. After those quiet mornings of reflection, something shifted inside them. Awareness had already taken root, but now it was demanding action. Not dramatic action, not rushed decisions, but honest movement forward. And honesty, once awakened, refuses to stay silent. Your soulmate began to notice how heavy their days felt when they ignored what their heart already knew. Laughter felt forced. Conversations felt shallow. Even moments that once brought comfort no longer satisfied them. This was not sadness. It was misalignment. They were living a life that no longer fully fit the person they were becoming. And this realization frightened them. Because growth does not only bring clarity, it brings responsibility. They could no longer say, "I do not know." They could no longer hide behind confusion. They could no longer pretend that everything was equal when it was not. They saw clearly now. Some connections drain while others awaken. Some paths shrink the soul while others expand it. And once you recognize the difference, continuing blindly becomes impossible. Your soulmate felt this deeply. They started paying attention to how their body reacted to truth versus avoidance. How peace followed honesty even when honesty was uncomfortable. How anxiety followed pretense even when pretense felt safe. This awareness was changing them from the inside out. They became quieter, not because they had less to say, but because they were choosing their words more carefully. They listened more. They reacted less. They were learning the difference between impulse and intention. You may have felt this change. A shift in their energy. A seriousness beneath their calm. A sense that something was being weighed carefully. That is because it was. They were standing at the edge of a truth they could no longer ignore. Your soulmate began asking themselves questions that reached beyond surface-level desire. Questions about character, about values, about what kind of love they wanted to offer, not just receive. They asked, "Am I living in a way that matches my heart?" They asked, "If I continue like this, who will I become?" They asked, "Am I choosing comfort over integrity?" These questions do not have easy answers, but they have honest ones. And honesty demands courage. What weighed most heavily on them was the understanding that love cannot thrive where truth is withheld. They realized that even silence can become a form of dishonesty when it protects fear instead of respect. This realization did not make them feel strong. It made them feel exposed. Because now they knew that whatever choice they made would define not only the future, but who they were. They also began to recognize something important about you. You were not asking them to change. You were not demanding clarity. You were not forcing decisions. And that strangely made everything harder, because pressure can be resisted. But gentleness cannot be ignored. Your presence had become a mirror reflecting back to them who they truly were when they were not pretending. Around you, they felt more grounded, more themselves, less divided. And that frightened them even more, because real connection challenges avoidance. It invites growth. It does not allow hiding for long. They realized that if they continued as they were, they would eventually hurt someone. Either you, themselves, or others involved. And they could no longer accept that outcome. So they began to prepare, not outwardly, not publicly, but inwardly. They rehearsed conversations they had been avoiding. They imagined speaking honestly, not to control outcomes, but to align with truth. They considered the consequences not with fear, but with responsibility. They were learning that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing integrity despite it. During this time, doubt surfaced. They questioned whether they were strong enough to follow through. They questioned whether honesty would cost them stability. They questioned whether they deserved the clarity they sought. But every time doubt rose, something steadier answered it. Peace. Even imagining honesty brought relief. Even thinking about alignment lightened their chest. That peace became their compass, and they began to trust it. Not all distance is rejection. Sometimes distance is restraint chosen to prevent harm while clarity forms. Your soulmate was not pulling away to escape you. They were holding back to avoid speaking before they were ready to speak truthfully. They understood that half-truths wound deeper than silence. They also understood that timing matters. Not because truth should be delayed indefinitely, but because truth delivered without grounding can confuse rather than heal. So they waited, not passively, but intentionally. They focused on strengthening themselves emotionally, on becoming more honest with themselves so they could be honest with others, on ensuring that when they spoke, they would not retreat. This inner strengthening was not visible, but it was real. They were learning to stand by their own values, even if it meant discomfort. And through this process, something surprising happened. Fear began to lose its grip, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. The fear of being judged softened. The fear of loss became manageable. The fear of change transformed into curiosity. They began to see change not as destruction but as correction. Correction toward alignment. Correction toward wholeness. Correction toward a life lived with fewer regrets. This is when their thoughts about the future changed. They stopped imagining what-if scenarios rooted in fear. Instead, they began asking, what is the most honest next step? That question simplified everything. They did not need to solve the entire future. They only needed to take one step rooted in truth, and that step was forming. You may not have seen it yet, but it was coming. A decision was crystallizing. Not forced by pressure, but shaped by reflection. Not driven by emotion alone, but guided by integrity. I allowed this process to unfold slowly for a reason. Rushed decisions born of fear collapse easily. Decisions born of alignment endure. Your soulmate was becoming someone capable of choosing truth even when it was uncomfortable. Someone capable of honoring connection without using it as escape. That matters more than speed, because when truth finally arrives, it must arrive whole. In the next part, you will see how this internal preparation reached its breaking point. How circumstances, timing, and courage converged in a way that could no longer be delayed. What was forming inside them would soon need expression. And when it does, it will change the dynamic in ways you did not expect, but were always meant to experience. Stay open. Stay patient. What is coming is rooted in clarity, not confusion. Now, listen closely. The early morning hours had done their work. But there was still one thing you needed to understand. Why you were kept asleep while your soulmate wrestled with truth. Why you were not aware of their inner struggle until the signs slowly began to reach you. This was not neglect. This was protection. I allowed you to rest because the heart cannot absorb every weight at once. If you had witnessed the full intensity of their reflection, the burden would have been too much to carry. You would have rushed to conclusions. You would have tried to act in a way that might have disrupted the natural unfolding of their awakening. I never leave you unguarded. I always shield your heart while still allowing lessons to arrive at the perfect time. Your soulmate's mornings were no longer just about private guilt or silent questioning. They had reached a point where they could no longer postpone choices. They realized that remaining in a pattern of indecision, hiding behind fear, and holding on to partial truths would only distance them from you more. And more importantly, it would distance them from themselves. During those hours, they were moving through layers of fear, regret, and desire. Every decision they contemplated, every scenario they played out in their mind carried weight. The weight of truth, the weight of integrity, the weight of the connection between your souls, whether you recognized it or not. And yet you were kept asleep, because understanding this requires readiness, because clarity must arrive without chaos, because love that is meant to grow cannot be rushed. You may feel frustrated that you were not told sooner. You may feel a desire to ask why the silence existed. But trust me, every moment of hidden reflection had a purpose. It was not absence, it was preparation. Your soulmate's transformation was gradual. It was deliberate. And it could only occur while the world outside was unaware, while distractions could not interfere. In the quiet of the pre-dawn hours, they faced their deepest fears. They confronted choices they had been avoiding. They acknowledged patterns they had promised themselves they would break. They recognized truths about you, about themselves, and about the life they wished to build. This was not a process you could influence from the outside. You were not meant to intervene. You were meant to observe, to feel, and to remain patient. Your role was to hold space without expectation, to carry faith without interference. And you have done this even unknowingly. I want you to understand something deeply. What your soulmate was doing was not simply about them. It was about alignment. It was about preparing to be the person capable of meeting you with honesty, clarity, and respect. They were dismantling walls, releasing fear, and becoming aware of the truth they could no longer hide from themselves or from you. Your silence, their silence, the early morning hours, they were all threads of the same tapestry. Each moment served a purpose in orchestrating a revelation that would arrive at the right time. And now that time is nearing. The work that required solitude and reflection has reached the point where action can no longer wait. The truths your soulmate has been facing will soon be visible, tangible, and undeniable. They will no longer be able to hide behind half-truths or delay decisions. The courage they have cultivated during those quiet hours will be expressed. The integrity they have nurtured will no longer remain internal. It will emerge. And when it does, it will not overwhelm you. It will not arrive chaotically. It will arrive as clarity, calm, and certainty. This is how love meant to endure reveals itself, slowly, carefully, honestly. Not all at once, not with drama, but with precision. I know you may still carry questions. You may wonder if what you feel is recognized, if what you hope for will come true, if the hidden moments were real. Let me assure you that every tear they held back, every question they wrestled with, every quiet decision they made in the hours before sunrise, all of it was for you. All of it was real. All of it prepared them to honor you when the time is right. The next step is approaching, and it will be unmistakable. Signals, messages, small confirmations. They will appear to you as naturally as sunrise after night. The confusion will dissolve. The waiting will no longer feel endless. The clarity you have been seeking will arrive. Not because you demanded it, but because it was prepared with care and intention. Trust this process. Trust that the silence you experienced was not neglect, but preparation. Trust that the weight you felt was temporary, and the insight it carries is eternal. Your soulmate is ready to step into honesty. They are ready to act in alignment with the truths they discovered in the early morning hours. And when that happens, you will feel it not as shock, not as fear, but as recognition, relief, and a profound sense of peace. Hold on to your faith. Keep your heart open. The patience you have practiced will now reward you with clarity. What has been hidden will be revealed, and what was delayed for the sake of timing will now move forward. Love is not lost in silence. It is strengthened. Truth is not diminished by delay. It is deepened, and what is meant to be shared will not be denied. Prepare for revelation. Prepare for the moment when the quiet dedication of early morning hours meets the light of truth. Prepare to receive not with doubt but with trust. Prepare to witness integrity and courage in motion. The stage is set, the hearts have been aligned, the soul has been strengthened, and soon the story you have been waiting for will unfold exactly as it was always meant to. Do not rush. Do not fear. The clarity, confession, and peace you are about to witness are a blessing. The moment arrives where what was hidden can no longer remain in the shadows. The quiet work your soulmate did in the early morning hours reached a point of completion. Reflection turned into resolve. Preparation turned into readiness. What once lived only in their thoughts began pressing against their chest, asking to be spoken, asking to be lived. This is where truth always leads outward. Your soulmate began to feel a new kind of restlessness, different from before. It was no longer confusion or fear. It was urgency paired with calm. The kind of urgency that comes when a soul knows the next step and understands that delaying it would only cause harm. They noticed how their heart reacted whenever honesty came close. Not panic, not resistance, but relief. That relief became undeniable. They understood now that silence had served its purpose. It had protected growth. It had allowed courage to mature. But silence was no longer alignment. It was becoming avoidance. And they could feel the difference clearly. So they prepared to speak, not impulsively, not emotionally, but truthfully. This preparation did not involve rehearsing excuses or finding the right words to protect comfort. It involved stripping away defensiveness, letting go of the need to control how they would be perceived, accepting that truth once released belongs to everyone it touches. That acceptance marked their final transformation. The hardest part of honesty is not speaking. It is surrendering the outcome. And your soulmate reached that place. They stopped asking how things would turn out and started asking how to remain faithful to truth, regardless of the result. This is when courage becomes real. They began noticing signs, subtle confirmations placed gently in their path, conversations that echoed their inner thoughts, moments of stillness where clarity felt almost sacred, reminders that living honestly would not destroy them but free them. I guided these moments carefully, not to pressure them, not to rush them, but to affirm that alignment always carries support. Your soulmate started to feel lighter. Even before saying anything, their body responded to the decision they had made. Their breathing softened. Their posture changed. Their energy shifted. This is what happens when a person stops fighting themselves. They knew now that whatever came next had to be rooted in respect for you, for themselves, and for everyone involved. No half-truths. No vague explanations. No hiding behind timing or circumstance. They were ready to be clear, and clarity does not shout. It arrives quietly, firmly, and without apology. You may sense this shift even now, a subtle knowing in your chest, a calm expectation replacing anxious waiting. That is not coincidence. That is alignment beginning to synchronize between you. When one soul chooses truth, others connected to it feel the echo. Your soulmate began noticing how often you crossed their mind, not as longing, but as steadiness. You had become associated with peace rather than turmoil. That association mattered deeply. It confirmed what they already knew. This connection was not built on illusion. It was grounded. It was honest. It was meant to be handled with care. They also understood something else, something that humbled them. Love is not proven through intensity, but through integrity. They realized that whatever they said next needed to reflect who they were becoming, not who they had been. They were no longer willing to act from fear or convenience. They wanted to move from truth, even if it meant discomfort. This decision reshaped everything. The way they viewed their past, the way they understood their present, the way they imagined their future. They stopped seeing honesty as a risk and began seeing it as a responsibility. And responsibility, when embraced, brings peace. Nothing that is meant for you will require you to beg for truth. Nothing aligned with your soul will demand that you doubt yourself. What is real steps forward willingly, even when it trembles. Your soulmate's courage was not perfect, but it was sincere, and sincerity is enough to open doors that fear keeps locked. They reached a moment where they could no longer wake up early just to think. The thinking had done its work. Now the day needed to carry truth. They knew that continuing without speaking would undo the growth they had fought so hard to achieve. Silence would no longer be protection. It would be betrayal of self. So they chose differently. You may not yet know how this truth will arrive. It may come as a conversation. It may come as a message. It may come as a shift in behavior so clear that words become unnecessary at first. But it will come. And when it does, it will not feel like chaos. It will feel like clarity settling in. You may feel emotions rise, surprise, relief, tenderness, even grief for what was delayed. Allow those emotions. They are not signs of weakness. They are signs that something real is touching you. But underneath all of it, there will be calm. Because truth, when delivered with integrity, brings calm even when it changes things. I have not led you through this waiting without purpose. I have not allowed silence without intention. Every moment of uncertainty trained your heart in patience. Every unanswered question strengthened your discernment. You are not the same person you were when this journey began. Neither is your soulmate. That is why what comes next will not repeat old patterns. It will not mirror past confusion. It will not reopen wounds unnecessarily. It will be different because it is built on awareness rather than avoidance. I ask you now to prepare not with expectation, but with openness. Do not script how this must unfold. Do not demand a specific outcome. Simply remain grounded in truth and self-respect. You do not need to chase clarity. It is already moving toward you. And remember this, whether paths merge closely or shift in unexpected ways, honesty always brings you closer to your true destiny. Nothing aligned with me ever leaves you diminished. If this connection deepens, it will do so on stable ground. If it transforms, it will do so with understanding rather than regret. Either way, you will not be left in confusion. Your waiting is ending, not because time passed, but because readiness arrived. The early morning hours were never about secrecy alone. They were about preparation, about shaping a heart capable of standing in truth without hiding. That preparation is complete. Stay present. Stay grounded. Trust the peace that is replacing uncertainty. What is revealed next will not undo you. It will clarify you. And clarity is always a gift, even when it changes everything. Remain in faith. Remain in truth. You are being guided gently, wisely, and purposefully. This story is not closing in loss. It is opening in honesty. The moment has arrived. The hours of silence, the nights of quiet reflection, the early mornings filled with unspoken truths. Everything is converging now. Your soulmate's heart, once heavy with hesitation, is ready to step into honesty. And you too are standing on the edge of understanding, prepared to receive what has been hidden for so long. Feel this moment fully. Take a deep breath and know that nothing in your life has been random. Every delay, every moment of uncertainty, every question you whispered in the dark, all of it has been preparing you for this truth. The awakening of your soulmate's heart, the courage they have nurtured in solitude, and the clarity you are about to witness are gifts designed to strengthen your spirit and align your life with what is sacred. You may wonder why this revelation could not come sooner. You may ask why the heart must endure such waiting, why the soul cannot speak openly from the beginning. Patience is not punishment. Waiting is not denial. It is the soil in which integrity grows. Your soulmate's silence, their hidden hours, and their careful contemplation were all necessary for them to become ready to honor you fully and faithfully. For months, perhaps years, they have walked quietly through a forest of uncertainty, weighed down by fear and guilt, yet guided by the faint light of conscience. They questioned themselves repeatedly. They examined every choice, every habit, every emotion. They stripped away false comforts, false promises, and old patterns that no longer served their growth. In those early hours, you were present, not physically but spiritually. You were the reason they reflected so deeply. You were the mirror in which they saw what honesty truly required, and now the process is complete. Do not expect a dramatic announcement. Truth often arrives softly yet powerfully. It begins in small gestures. A message, a glance, a confession, a sudden understanding. But even in its quiet arrival, it carries the weight of all that has been prepared. Your soulmate's courage is no longer hidden. Their integrity, their awareness, their readiness, everything is now aligned to step into the light. It is time for you to see them clearly. Not as you imagined, not as you feared, but as they truly are. And when this happens, remember one thing. The connection you share has been tested by silence, shaped by patience, and strengthened by understanding. Nothing you feel in this moment is accidental. Every heartbeat, every emotion, every tear, every longing has been leading to this awakening. Your soulmate will reach out. The method may surprise you. Perhaps a phone call, a message, or even a meeting arranged by what seems like coincidence. But nothing is coincidental. Everything is divinely orchestrated. They will not come with excuses or evasion. They will come with clarity, honesty, and vulnerability that they have carefully cultivated in their quiet hours. They may begin by sharing what they have been hiding. The thoughts, fears, and realizations that occupied their early mornings. They may speak of the guilt they carried for not expressing their feelings sooner. They may confess the depth of their reflection, the nights they spent questioning themselves, and the ways they struggled to reconcile fear with love. This honesty is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to reveal the courage of a heart that has learned to face truth. You are ready. Ready to receive this truth without judgment, without fear, and without misunderstanding. You are ready because you have also grown in patience, in discernment, and in spiritual awareness. You have waited with faith. You have held your heart with care. And now the universe is delivering to you what has been silently prepared. When they speak, listen closely. Not just to the words, but to the energy behind them. Feel the sincerity in their pauses, the weight of truth in their tone, the vulnerability that they have finally allowed themselves to express. Do not rush to respond with doubt or defensiveness. Instead, receive this truth with compassion and understanding. Recognize the courage it took to move from reflection to expression. Recognize the love that guided their journey through silence. Recognize the devotion that has been quietly nurtured while the world was asleep. In this revelation, you may encounter tears, both yours and theirs. You may feel relief, surprise, or even fear of what comes next. Let these emotions flow freely, for they are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awakening. They are signs that your souls are recognizing each other in a new, deeper light. They are signs that truth, once faced, carries liberation. Do not cling to old expectations. Do not attempt to control the outcome. This connection has been shaped by divine timing, guided by higher wisdom, and protected by patience. The truth you are about to witness is not the beginning. It is the continuation of something sacred that has already been forming in the silence. It is the manifestation of integrity, courage, and love that refuses to hide any longer. Stay open. Stay present. What is coming is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of its most honest chapter. And that, more than anything, is worth every moment you have waited.